my name is Thomas. I'm calling in all the way from Copenhagen today. And so I guess my soapbox is my little dinner table. And what I'm going to talk about today is, in fact, how you as creatives can embrace this new and emerging trend of businesses advertising doing good. And as you probably have seen, this has becoming a much more important topic in Cannes Lions, across award shows, and for a lot of the brands that we work for today. So I have brought with me a presentation that will give you a few very hands-on tools and tricks on how to create highly creative and highly impactful communication. And I know that some of your internet connections might be a little bit unstable, so I will be sharing a few links as we go about. Also, please feel free to write in the chat. That's where it's for, and you can see I've written as well. So if you have any questions as we go along, please do write in the chat. No questions are dumb. This is your opportunity. So anyways, I will just quickly jump into sharing a little bit of presentation with you here today. So anyway, doing well by doing good. My journey into this, I used to be a copywriter. I hope there's other copywriters and this call before obviously going on to becoming a creative director, and today running my own agency, the Goodvertising agency, with a strong focus on creating communication and shaping brands that are not just only good for people and planet, but are also good for brand and bottom line. What inspired me was, in fact, the climate summit that was held here in Copenhagen. Obviously, I had a lot of hopes to our elected government leaders, but as we know, this kind of happened. Nothing much came out of our elected government leaders. So I thought, hey, wait a moment, where they don't want to do anything about the social and environmental issues we find ourselves in, what can we do as creatives? What can we do as marketeers? And that sparked me to write my first book, Goodvertising. And yes, that's a fairly young Thomas there, with a very simple mission to say that, hey, wait a moment, brands and business have been part of creating a huge environmental and social injustice. Thus, they can also be part of the solution. Since then, Goodvertising has become a global community, and I'll encourage each and one of you to go and visit goodvertising.com and submit your work. We are always very interested in a diverse conversation around what great, impactful creativity is. So go and submit your work, go get inspired by other people's great work. And this year we actually inaugurated our first Goodvertising Awards 2020, where we shined a light on the 10 greatest pieces of work globally that were selected by our jury. So you cannot enter the awards. These are a selection of the 10 greatest pieces of work judged on the criteria, potential, impact, and creativity. And I have been a steady judge across the world, from Cannes Lions, where I judged the last one we've had in person anyway, which is now 2 years ago, believe it or not, where I judged the Sustainable Development Goal lines. But I have been judging D&AD for years and years and years, and many other awards in this impact space. Recently, I wrote a new book because there is a massive change from my first book to today, because as you probably have noticed, a lot of brands are starting to speak up for good, but we're also starting to see a lot of missteps, a lot of brands doing it wrong. So my new book, The Hero Trap, looks at how you can talk about your brand as force for good, but avoiding becoming avoid doing those sort of missteps. And basically the main thrust of this book is basically, don't pitch a brand as the hero, but turn each and every one of us into the heroes in our own lives. But as I said today, I will be focusing much more about giving you some very practical tools and tricks on how you can create impactful communication that might even go on to win an award. And obviously, the landscape has changed today. We cannot just go out there and say, hey, look at our brand, because it might not be what we tell the brand is, because people are scrutinizing brands today. So when Coca-Cola talks about, cheers to a good feeling, people also look at Coca-Cola as part of a surging obesity crisis across most of the world. So as brand marketeers, as brand custodians, we need to be very clear that brands are not just the very tip of the iceberg anymore, but it's everything that's underneath water level. So, for example, how sustainable are your products? Where are they made? What are the sugar contents? There's an increasing focus on the much bigger societal mix, or the mix of the leadership of that organization. Is it diverse enough? And obviously now with new leadership coming out of the US, I am certain that especially the diversity and the climate agenda will have a renewed focus globally. So very, very happy about that. But what I talk about is basically not anything new. It has been part of a conversation for a very long time. And this ad from 1970 really kind of puts focus on it, where the ad reads, obviously, if the designer is to make a deliberate contribution to society, he must be able to integrate all he can learn about behavior, resources, ecology, and human needs. Taste and style just isn't enough. And yes, the only thing that has changed is obviously today, luckily, a designer cannot just be a he, but also a she. So there is obviously a bit of progress. But as I said, I'm going to share 5 hacks with you here today, 5 creative hacks on how you can do impactful creativity. The first one I'm going to share is this one. So hack number 1, snoop up the story like a journalist. So yes, when I started out in business about 2 decades ago, my most important role was to sit on my chair in a white room and come up with the best possible story I could think around, for example, a cheeseburger. But that won't cut it anymore, because brands, as I said, are being scrutinized. So what I'll encourage you to do is think like a documentary filmmaker, to think like a journalist, and go out there and discover the stories and tell those real life stories. And it's really something I see more and more also when we discuss awards. This is something that I think is in everybody's minds, because this is about real impact. But maybe again, this might not be something that's so incredibly new, but if you look at one of my favorite old ads that obviously featured in David Ogilvy's quite old book now, Ogilvy and Advertising, still worth the read. And this is an ad, obviously, that David wrote the copy for. At 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in this new Rolls Royce comes from the electric clock. So what's so interesting about this ad? Why do I think this is still, to this day, about 50 years later, a piece of work that we should celebrate? It is because how would he know? How would he know that at 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise comes from the electric clock? He can only know that by trying out the product, by being curious. And what a lucky bastard to be able to be lucky enough to drive a Rolls Royce. But that is also a big encouragement to all of you out there on this line. Be curious, try the product, try to find the core story. So obviously one of the pieces of work that I've seen that I think is really curious, it's a piece of work that came out of Colombia quite a few years ago. And basically the problem was these dragon fish that was alien to Colombian waters and were ruining a lot of the fish, the indigenous species living there. And obviously the Ministry of Environment could of course just create a campaign, but what they did was they created tools for the very fishermen to go and catch these fish. So the concept of priceless traps were made. So observing the real life challenges and coming up with a real life solution. So I'll definitely encourage you to leave the office, go out there, explore how life is on the street, and try and find those real life stories, those real life concerns, whether that is garbage lying around in townships, whether that is things like loneliness, or in a lot of us are facing now in COVID-19 lockdowns, etc. Another thing you can do is obviously also go online and browse for topics out there that people are talking about, or even more so, go to a lot of companies that you will be working with. If you work from brand side, they will have what is called a corporate social responsibility report or a sustainability report, where they will talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that company is facing. This is one from Carlsberg, the brewer. So there's many places you can find this, and it's really about not having to invent a story, but find the story. And one of my favorite campaigns from last year was in fact a campaign that shined a light on a very divisive topic, obviously diversity. And this was a US travel agency that catered to Afro-American travelers, and obviously in a very toxic US environment where there was a lot of toxic conversations happening on Twitter, where there was sentences like "go back to Africa," and the travel agency turned the "go back to Africa" sentence into one of pride. So really a very clever, ingenious campaign, turning a blatant, dumb, racist slur into something quite genius and beautiful, and to actually show the beauty of Africa, and encouraging African American travelers to go and explore everything, all the great things that Africa has to offer. One of the hacks that I also encourage you to do, which I do very often, is each and every time I find a story that I think is interesting, I add it to a folder on my desktop. So if you're working on a specific brand, whatever is in that brand sphere, tag it, use it. For example, I saw how trash during the Olympics in Rio was a huge challenge for the sailors, because they would get slower times because of all the traps, all the trash slowing the ships. So here's an opportunity as a brand to support sailors and to clean the environment at the same time. So obviously, first hack, you don't have to invent a story. What you have to do is you have to find a story. And I will be sharing some of these links to these cases, so you can have a much closer look at them. The second hack, so hack number 2 coming up, is don't create campaigns. Don't just tell stories, but solve stuff. Find real solutions. I'm one of those crazy guys that like surfing, wave surfing, but you know, a big part of, unfortunately, wave surfing is also sharks. But sharks are, whether you like them or not, a really, really important part of the ecosystem. They are the lions of the oceans, and without the sharks, the oceans are not healthy. So one brand that wanted to do something about that was the Australian telecommunication provider Optus, and they created what they called a clever buoy that would detect any emerging sharks, send a signal to a satellite that would warn the lifeguards on the beach, thus getting people safely ashore. So real life solution. This is always an interesting territory because it's almost in between product innovation and campaigns. For those of you who want to know more about some of these things, Timon Tark has written quite an interesting book called Story Doing about this as well. This was a case that I judged in CAN lines and Sustainable Development Goal lines category. Obviously, food waste are an issue in many places around the world, and obviously a lot of people don't know when something is fresh to eat. So here, with this little innovation, you could feel on the label if it was bumpy, the milk and would be overdue, and that could be added to many other products as well. So really think about how you can solve these issues. Again, be curious, question things. Think about if there's a solution to this. Because if you think about the authenticity and the trust that comes from a brand holding your hand and saying, let's solve this together, it's really, really powerful. Because it's not just a campaign, you're doing a real tangible difference in people's lives. This is another example from Ford. Obviously, this was targeted at truck drivers, obviously driving hours on end and probably drinking tons of Red Bull and coffee. But for them not to fall asleep, which is obviously a big hazard on the road, they created this cap that the cab drivers could wear. And if your head tilted, it would create a sound and the truck drivers would wake up. So a very ingenious, beautiful little hack. So always think about how you can solve things. So on to hack number 3 coming up. And again, do feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and I will have a look in a few minutes to see what questions we have in. And for those of you who are just joining, welcome. My name is Thomas, and I'm going to serve up some real life hacks for how you could create a great creativity for good that makes a real impact and might also get you an award. Onwards to hack number 3, sweaty balls beat creativity. Yes, it's true. This is not just about being incredibly creative. A lot of these initiatives that I judge, a lot of these initiatives that I honor as best in class, as the ones that create the biggest impact in the world, demand a lot of work. It demands a lot of work to make these initiatives happen. And it's not just enough with a great idea. Actually, talking about coffee, I'll just quickly have a cup of coffee there. Anyway, so one of the winners that won a Grand Prix in Cannes, which really shows how much work some of this stuff demands, was a campaign called The Lion's Share. And again, I'm going to share a few of those links in a while. What The Lion's Share did was saying, isn't it interesting that when we use people in commercials, we pay a model fee? But think about the millions of animals that are used day out and day in commercials. I mean, dogs and cats definitely used to be favorites, right? So the idea about Lion's Share is basically to be a sort of model agency for animals. So if you're Mars, if you're Unilever and you use an animal, Lion's Share encourage you to pay a model fee. And that model fee doesn't go to the dog, unfortunately, probably would like a bit of dog food, but what it does go to is animal conservation and preservation projects around the world, quite a few actually on the African continent. So a very genius little hack, but also takes a lot of effort to make this happen, demands a lot of collaboration to make this happen. Another project that I really do like, because as I said, we are in a state of a climate emergency where we day and day again experience the serious consequences such as droughts and similar and extreme weather phenomena, floodings, etc. Something that all of you have also experienced. And so very rarely I do see any campaigns that do anything good in this space, but one of the ones that I really do like is this one called Economy. Basically, the whole idea is that when you buy something with your credit card, it will give you not only the credit card statement, but also put a carbon estimate, a carbon footprint estimate on what you buy. So in that way, you'll be able to live more carbon friendly. Very, very simple. I often use the parallel that, think about if you want to lose weight, you stand on the scale and you can see, oh, I put on 2 kilos or I lost 2 kilos or whatever. And this is the equivalent with carbon emissions. Because how would you know if you live more carbon friendly if you don't know your current carbon emission state? And they even put a carbon emission limit on it, like you have a credit card limit. So when you reach that, you are encouraged to obviously offset or invest in exciting climate projects around the world. So a really interesting project. And again, I will share some of these links. Another project that I really like that comes from Carlsberg, the brewer, that is actually from Denmark, not too far away from where I'm sitting here today in Copenhagen, Denmark. Probably a lot of you have seen packaging lying around. I've definitely seen that in lagers, and sometimes even those 6-pack rings that is around beer cans. And what Carlsberg wanted to do was to get rid of that 6-pack ring completely. And they've done that by a very, very simple innovation by putting a piece of glue between those 6-packs. So you can just do like that, and they called it Snap Pack. So again, this was a piece of work that we judged in Cannes and D&D Impact as well. And a similar idea came from Corona, but instead of a piece of glue, they screwed the cans together. Unfortunately, the big difference between this, which again shows how much hard work some of these things take and tenacity, you need to keep push the client, or if you work at brand side, keep rallying your employees internally to make this happen, because Carlsberg did happen and they launched the Snap Pack in many, many markets. Unfortunately, the Corona idea has still not made it into the market, which is of course incredibly sad. So onwards to hack number 4. And this is a thing that I'm very passionate about because if we want to create change, it needs to take a giant leap. It needs to be scalable. So hack number 4, make it as scalable as a virus for good. Kind of sad to talk about viruses these days, by the way. So terrible analogy. Sorry about that. But these are old slides. But how do you create something that's scalable, that can spread, that can inspire change? One of the initiatives that I really like is this all the way from Israel. And obviously the idea was to do something for disabled people. And as you might know, if you know IKEA is a very kind of modular furniture concept where you obviously have to put the IKEA furniture together yourself. So what this project did was in fact to come up with additions, small things that you could add to the furniture to make them more friendly towards disabled people. And not only were these additions possible to buy in select stores, but you could also go and print them on a 3D printer. So a really interesting, scalable project that I think can deliver a lot of change for a lot of people. Another project I want to talk about, which is also one of the projects I cover in my new book, The Hero Trap, is really thinking about that marketing is dramatically changing. It's not really just about mass marketing anymore. A lot of us grow up using Instagram, Facebook, and selling things online. So we are acute marketeers in a very early age. So how can marketeers stop the ignorant mass marketing approach and turn us into co-creators? Because there's nothing worse than somebody just coming to tell you something. Do this, do that. You probably all had a boss like that. What we love is when we have a possibility to shape an assignment, to be creative on our own terms. And one company that did that was the cooperative REI, which is American retailer that sells clothing and gear for outdoor enthusiasts. And on Black Friday, the big shopping day that we all know where people go crazy and buy stuff, they said, don't go to our stores, go out and enjoy the outdoors. Something that really resonated with people. And they turned people into the ambassadors for this program, and they said opt outside, and a lot of people shared the campaign and took part in the campaign. The amazing thing about when you create something that's scalable, in when you turn people into participants rather than a passive target group, you see exponential growth, because you're not limited about your budget or by your internal resource, because people take part, and it's interesting to see how the participation in the Opt Outside campaign have risen again and again, year on year in the US. And now it's the second most visited day in state parks in the US, on a day where people really didn't go to the state parks before. So think about scalability, think about how you can turn people into participants across the marketing mix. And let's just have a look to see if there are any questions so far on the little chat here. I still don't see any questions, but as I said, I'll really encourage you to write the questions as I go about this presentation here. And in the meantime, I will just share a few links for some of the case studies, and I will go further and share a few more hacks that you can use in your daily life as creatives that want to do good. So these are the few of the case studies that I have talked about. A lot of really great stuff in there to be inspired by. Also, I will encourage you to go and obviously check out goodvertising.com, where there's tons of inspiration as well. And this was the Go Back to Africa campaign, which is really a powerful piece of creative work as well. So great. So let's continue with this little session. Again, do write your questions, and we will have a bit of time to go through those questions in the end as well. But I will continue now with this little presentation here. So as you might know, and as you can hear from what I'm sharing here today, I am passionate about real change. It's not enough anymore just to do a flashy campaigns that talk about, hey, look at this issue. We need to talk more about diversity. We need to talk more about climate. No, what's really pushing the needle, what's really creating change is when all of us change behaviors, or when you go in with innovations and create real life solutions. This is where change is happening. So don't just change minds, change behaviors. And over the years, I've worked a lot with behavior change, and at the agency, we work with what we call change maker cards. these cards all target one specific behavior we want to change, and use a little trigger, something that can teach you to change that behavior. And often we co-create with clients, or we co-create with the target group whose behaviors we actually want to change. Because, why would you be the best one equipped at knowing how to change your target group's behaviors? Probably they would know best themselves. So this is how we use this tool as a sort of an insight gatherer into what might make these people tick. One of these triggers that we use are status. One of the triggers we use are reward. So how do you reward people for the right behavior? And Antarctica, Brazilian beer, wanted to encourage people to not drink and drive during the Carnival in Rio. Obviously, it's a very festive event where the whole of the city goes bonanza and party and drink. And so one thing Antarctica did was they wanted to reward people for the right behavior. So on the bar, on the can, on the beer can, you could scan the barcode, and that would work as a ticket for the public transportation system, such as the metro, such as the bus. Very clever way. When you have a beer in the hand, it will work as a bus ticket. Very, very clever. Another thing we often forget is when we want people to change behavior, we often forget to ask them to change that specific behavior. So just asking people to do something is actually a very efficient driver of behavior change. This is a very famous campaign a couple of years ago in Europe, because as washing detergents have become more effective, or the enzymes in those washing detergents have become more effective, it's not necessary anymore to wash at high temperatures. So when you got a modern washing powder, 30 degrees enough. And so what Ariel did was just say to people, turn to 30 degrees, which will enable shorter washing cycles, and obviously a lot of saved money on energy usage. This was also something that Lifebuoy, the Unilever soap, did during a big Hindu festival in India. On the roti breads during this festival, they stamped, "Did you wash your hands with Lifebuoy?" So a very, very clever ask at the right time. And that's often the thing about behavior change. You need to target people at the very time that you want to change that behavior. Another last trigger, so we talked about rewarding right behavior, asking people to create change. One of my favorites is actually, why not use fun? Why not make it fun for people to change behavior? And one of my favorites comes from the southern tip of Africa, all the way down to South Africa, and obviously getting people to wear sunscreen is not always easy. As a kid, I used to hate my mom putting sunscreen on me. And Nivea, obviously known for their creams and sun protection, wanted to reward, wanted to make it fun for kids to put on sunscreen. So what they created was a water slide with running sunscreen on it. So when you took the water slide, you would get the cream and the protection needed. So a very ingenious way of changing behaviors. So always think about how you can use behavior change mechanics to do this. The ones that I shared with you obviously today is reward, ask, and using fun as behavior changes. But there are multiple other ones. So if you want to know more about that, obviously get in contact with me. Also, just as a hack, or maybe it's not as much as a hack as a creative insight, also want to talk a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals. And I don't know how much all of you know about these, but these are goals that have been agreed by the United Nations, goals that we all need to live up to make our world more fair, just, environmentally friendly for all of us living here, and the 17 goals cover everything from health to education to partnerships. And if you haven't heard about the goals yet, I am certain that you will be hearing much more about them. And the goals put specific targets in place that we will have to live up to solve some of these challenges that we are facing as humanity, covering things like the biosphere, things like life underwater, things like, unfortunately, a lot of the deforestation that we're seeing also out of countries like Nigeria, a lot of the societal changes that need to happen, obviously with a ramping population growth in Nigeria. How do a country like yours provide enough education, or how do you create enough food to feed a growing population? So these are some of the things the Sustainable Development Goals look at. It's something that brands and big corporations take very seriously, and governments as well. And obviously the economic opportunities that delivers the prosperity to drive all of these efforts are pivotal thing as well. Can Lions have obviously 2 years in a row inaugurated the Cannes Lions Sustainable Development Goal Lions, and I'll encourage you to enter work into that award that specifically awards campaigns that do a great deal of change. A big thing in this is also to make it very tangible. A lot of these issues seem very difficult to understand. So it's very much about translating that into what does that mean for me. So for example, one of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, talk about how do you help end poverty. And obviously this is an attempt. It's called the Good Life Goals. You can see the little link in the bottom. And what they've done with these 17 cards is they translated the big audacious goals into something that's very easy and personal for people to understand. For example, share and donate what you can. That's tangible things that you can do in your everyday to live up to that big audacious goal of health and poverty, something that I think in a world that's becoming more affluent is something that we shouldn't ignore. One example from a winning case in Cannes is this case from UCB. It's a bank that collaborated with a supermarket. The insight was, in fact, that a lot of farmers, a lot of smallhold farmers, as you will be seeing in Nigeria as well, go to the markets, but sometimes they don't sell all the produce that they have and might have to either throw it away or sell at very bottom prices. So what the bank have facilitated is, in fact, that people can go and deposit their surplus produce of agricultural products and get money out of it. So immediately converting that into cash. So really clever way of supporting smallhold farmers. And obviously the Agribank then distribute that out to big supermarket chains that are participating. So one of the last things I want to talk about today is think about impact. When you do your creative campaigns, it's not enough. And I'm so tired of seeing these cases in Cannes saying, oh, we reached 5 million people that talked about the case, blah, blah, blah. 5 million social media, impressions. But when we talk about creativity as a force for good, it's because it changes stuff. So what changes did it really have? And those are the sort of things that you need to be very precise about if you want to have a chance in the award shows. And even today, brands and companies are looking for these issues because they have specific goals and targets in place to meet things such as lowering the carbon footprint, or, for example, becoming a more diverse company, or limiting the water usage. And a lot of these things can obviously be measured. One case I want to talk about that I really liked from India was, in fact, how private schools joined this initiative where after the people paying high tuition fees to go to the private schools, after hours, those schools opened up the doors to some of the more impoverished communities that couldn't afford a private school, and they encouraged people to go there and teach subjects that they cared about. So opening up in 3 months, this initiative, more than 55 schools, which is an impressive feature. So a very, very simple campaign, but with a massive measurable impact, because now they can count the students that go through these campaigns and the participating schools. And a lot of things today can't be measured, even across the sustainable development goals. There are tons of things that you can measure very concretely. So when you have your creative campaign, put some of these targets into the brief. If we just look at our targets such as good health and well-being, most countries do actually have precise or somewhat precise measures for things like death rates due to traffic injuries, or things like people dying when at a very young age. So think about impact. It really it does matter. And as I said, in your brief, add those metrics. Earlier, I talked about the Duconomy case that obviously looked and measured at carbon emissions. So a very, very concrete thing. Very last thing, when I do see work, when I judge work, and when you create commercials that are effective, it is basically always about making it a great fit for the brand. I unfortunately still see brands speaking about issues in this do-good space that doesn't really seem that relevant. So please make it fit. Some of you might remember this campaign from Volvo, for example, where they created a spray that would light up this fluorescent spray that would light up bicycles, or even the bicycle riders that was riding during the night, so they were easier to spot when passing in a car, and the headlights would hit this fluorescent spray and people would light up. So this is an example of a campaign with a great fit. Volvo has an ambition that in 2030 nobody should be killed or seriously injured in a car accident. This is one of the ways they can do that. A not so great fit for me is when Volvo did what they called a living seawall in the Australian harbour. I think this might be a little bit discharged from what Volvo is about, so not a great case. When we launched this little talk, doing good is good for business. I have been in this space for plus 10 years now, and obviously a lot have happened since my first book, Goodvertising, came out. This is now the talk of town, and it's imperative for brands to move in a more sustainable direction. But the good news is also that it is good for business, and it is good for the advertising effectiveness. When I look at the top winning campaigns across award shows, most of those today are what I would call a Goodvertising campaign. And why are those more effective? They are more effective because they don't just talk about the product. Not a lot of us just talk about products, but they talk about things that matter in our daily lives, things like the horrible traffic situation in Lagos, things like clean waterways, things like nice family values, whatever it might be. These are things that people talk about. The brands that talk about these things are part of a natural conversation. Secondly, a lot of these campaigns are very emotional, and emotional campaigns are simply more effective. Today, when you look at the biggest companies of the world, and this is a big study that was done for UN Global Compact by Accenture, 97% of CEOs today believe that sustainability will be important for the future success of their business. So this is a necessity. It's a hygiene factor when talking about brands. So the hacks that I presented for you here today that I want you to think about when you do creative work for good: snoop up the story like a journalist. You don't have to invent a story anymore and sit there in your office. Go out and observe stories and tell those real life stories. Don't create campaigns, solve stuff was hack number 2. Instead of just creating an awareness campaign, why don't you think about how can you solve this issue? Thirdly, sweaty balls beat creativity. It demands a lot of hard work to pull off some of these campaigns, so make it worthwhile. Don't change minds, change behaviors. So again, awareness campaigns won't cut it anymore. How can you actually truly change behaviors? Another campaign that just came to mind was actually one from India where they wanted people not to honk constantly in the traffic. So they created a traffic light where it was only when people stopped honking that it would turn to green. Very effective in changing people's behaviors. Bullshit bingo or creativity fire-started sustainable development goals are here to stay. Have a look at them. Think about how you can use them. Obviously, impact. So count those impact apples. And lastly, obviously, make a great fit for the brand. Before we go into the Q&A and look at some of the questions in the chat that you hopefully have submitted a few questions, I will also encourage you to obviously go and have a look at my new book, The Hero Trap. It's full with methodologies and tricks and tools and cases on how to create meaningful brands and meaningful communication. There's lots of conversations and interviews with leaders such as Mark Pritchett from Procter & Gamble. And also go and check out my first book called Goodvertising. And I will actually in the chat be sharing a little link where you can go and download a compact version of this book for free. So you can get a compact version of this book for free. You can also just go to thomaskolster.com and search for the compact version, but I'm going to share that in the link as well. And I will encourage you that if you believe in advertising, if you believe in your voice and your work as a force for good, I will encourage you to follow me on social. You can see I shared those links in the beginning of this chat as well. So such a pleasure presenting for you here today. And as I said, let me just share this compact version of Goodvertising for free. It's a really good starting point. Goodvertising, the book has more than 10 commandments, 10 hacks for good that you can use to further your creative career and in shaping brands going forward.